A dungeon without traps is sort of like Halloween without ghost stories. It's still nice, but there's just something missing. Despite often being overlooked, traps can serve a variety of purposes in our tabletop RPGs. If you feel like you neglected this part of your game, this video might be for you. You probably already have experience with simple traps, but I still want to look at them to see if we can spruce them up a bit, and then I want to look at more complex traps that are more like aligned with puzzles. And after that, I want to take the puzzles out of the dungeon and see what they can do out in the wider world. Also, apologies if you can hear the rain, it's crazy out there and there's nothing I can do about it. The simple trap is defined by being unseen and dealing instant damage to the player character that triggers it. Examples of this could be poison needles stabbing out at the hand of the character who's trying to pick a lock, or the classic pitfall, which drops a character down into a vat of acid, or the collapsing ceiling or an electrified doorknob. There are many options. The purpose of the simple trap is to drain the player characters of resources, like hit points, spell slots, potions, etc. This is in order to soften them up for the final confrontation in the heart of the dungeon. It can also serve to make the environment seem more dangerous and hostile, which is great for intensifying the atmosphere and make it a little more tense. The problem with the simple trap is that it can easily feel arbitrary to the players. Just suddenly taking a bunch of damage out of nowhere doesn't really feel great. There's no agency or involvement in it, and while you might say that is the point of a trap, you'd be right in the real world. But in a D&D game, even traps must be designed to increase the enjoyment. So here are 3 ways that you can use to alleviate these problems of the simple trap. The first way is to simply allow some kind of saving throw if a character triggers the trap. While this is just a die roll, it does take the brunt of the arbitrariness of taking a bunch of damage out of nowhere. It'll make the whole experience feel a little more involved on the player's part. For example, you could allow a dexterity save if a character is about to fall into a pit. If they succeed, they might still end up hanging precariously from the ledge, and that will allow other party members to come and assist them, creating this little character moment. You could make a character roll an intelligence save just as they step on the trigger of a trap, and if they succeed, they realize that if they lift their foot, they're gonna trigger the trap. So they now have the option to try to disable the trap, or they could try to find some way to get away from it safely while it is triggered. If a trap consists of a heavy log swinging down from the ceiling, you could allow a character to make some kind of strength saving throw to see if they can maybe bash it out of the way and that way avoid the damage. Basically, any kind of saving throw will make a trap feel more fair, and it could even turn it into this cool little character moment, which is always a win. The second way to soften the arbitrariness of a simple trap is to foreshadow it. If the players are aware of the risk of traps, triggering one will feel more like a consequence of them failing to spot it, and not so much just unavoidable damage. You can foreshadow traps in many ways, and here are some examples. The first trap the party comes across in a dungeon has already been triggered, displaying a skeleton of its last victim still hanging on the rusty spikes. This lets the players know that there are possibly traps beyond this one, and they have a chance to look for them, and even if they don't see them and they trigger one, there is some context for the trap. Or the party sees a body lying in the middle of a corridor, and a closer look reveals that it is riddled with tiny darts. They know there's a trap here, and they can try to investigate and try to understand it. Depending on how well they roll, they might only find parts of the trap, like the tiny holes in the walls where the darts come from, but not the actual trigger itself. Maybe they can see that the holes in the wall only go up 5 feet, so they can try to vault over that part of the corridor to avoid the trap, or they can maybe fill up the holes or some other way to block the damage from the trap. Or maybe a hooded and cloaked figure approaches them as they're making their way to the dungeon, warning them that the place they're about to head into is riddled with traps. Or they see a previous adventurer having written on the wall, "Beware the traps." Essentially, if the players are aware of the danger of traps, it'll feel more satisfying when they encounter them, even if they are just simple traps meant to take off a few hit points. Hit points are basically a measure of how far away a player is from having to sit on the sideline watching the other players do a combat encounter or dungeon delving. Therefore, hit points are a very precious resource, so if you want to soften the blow from a simple trap, you could swap the damage for some other effect. For example, a cursed mirror could impart some kind of short-term madness on the character instead of just damaging them. Or the spores of some fungi could give a character a strange or weird disease. A spell could sap the strength of a character, giving them 1 level of exhaustion. Poison could poison a character, or touching a door handle could transform the character into a critter or something other cute. Such effects are likely more memorable than just losing a few hit points, and it'll affect the party in more interesting ways than just having to hold back a little and try not to die. All in all, it takes very little to save simple traps from the pitfall of arbitrariness. But what if you want something more from your traps? To up your trap game, as they say. Well, let's look at how to create some more complex traps that might be considered sort of like on the border of being puzzles themselves. A puzzle trap, if we can call it that, can be defined as a trap that is easy to detect or not hidden at all, and which poses a clear threat to the characters. Examples could be a tantalizing chest standing on a plinth in the middle of a clearly trapped room, or a chain of acid jars suspended under the ceiling of a corridor, which is clearly meant to be dropped on the players. It could be a ballista pointing down a narrow corridor towards the party, or basically anything that presents itself as a clear threat to the player characters, allowing them a chance to figure out how to avoid it. The purpose of this kind of trap is to set up a challenge that doesn't involve combat or diplomacy. They are like puzzles, but with more edge. They don't reward the characters with treasure, but with the chance of getting to keep some of their hit points. The only real problem with this type of trap is to find a way to announce the trap without making it too easy to dismantle it. Like, if the characters can see the thing that's going to hurt them, how do you prevent them from just attacking that thing until it's no longer a threat? The way you can create a trap puzzle is very similar to the way I showed in my video on making puzzles in general, so if you want a more in-depth view into this, you can go and watch that video. We start by keeping the goal in our mind. A trap that shows its wicked face to the player characters and dares them to try to avoid it. Then we ask questions, and the answers to these questions will help us build the trap. Ask yourself the following questions and try to think of as many answers as possible, since it will allow you to choose the most interesting options. Question 1. What kind of punishment does the trap deliver? Question 2. How does the trap present itself? Question 3. How is the trap triggered? Question 4. How does the trap deliver the punishment? Question 5. How can the punishment be blocked? Question 6. How can the mechanism of the trap be dismantled? Now we answer each question with as many options as we can think of. Question 1. What kind of punishment does the trap deliver? Option 1. Beams of fire that burn the characters. Perhaps they shoot from the eyes of a statue. Option 2. Loud noise that makes the characters temporarily deaf. This could be paired with some kind of dangerous enemy in the dungeon, which can only be detected when they make this sound just before they strike. Option 3. A spell turns the party tiny. You could fill the entire dungeon with these harmless large spiders or some kind of other creature. Then, when the characters are shrunk, these creatures suddenly become a huge threat. Let's go with option 2. I like the idea of a trap that not only puts the characters at a general disadvantage, but also makes sort of an already dangerous foe even more threatening. Like the consequences of the trap extends beyond the trap itself. Next question. How does the trap present itself? Or in the case of the option we already took, how do you make the threat of sound visible? Option 1. Have large trumpet-like brass devices sticking out of the walls. Option 2. Large metal trays with dents from being hit by metal orbs sit in the floor. Maybe one of the orbs lie in a tray, giving the characters a chance to drop it in and hear the loud bang it makes. Option 3. A huge pipe organ lines the back wall. Option 4. Ominous arcane glyphs can be analyzed and revealed that they cause a loud noise when they are triggered. Let's go with option 2, since the metal trays and orbs give some possibilities for something mechanical happening. The pipe organ could be great if your setting is gothic horror though, so it kind of depends on the theme. Third question. How is the trap triggered? Option 1. By opening a fake trapdoor in the middle of the room. This trapdoor might entice the players with the prospect of further exploration. Option 2. By removing a key that is needed elsewhere in the dungeon, or an item that the party has come to collect. Option 3. By attacking a statue of a villain known to the party with this taunting message written across its face. Option 4. By making too much noise of their own. I like how option 4 sort of feels appropriate to the theme of the kind of punishment the trap is delivering, so let's go with that one. Fourth question. How does the trap deliver the punishment? Option 1. Holes in the ceiling connected to chambers full of metal orbs allow the orbs to drop down into the trays in a loud torrent. Option 2. The metal orbs are launched by a mechanism through the air to land on the trays, rolling back into the mechanisms like some kind of giant marble machine, creating a continuously deafening sound. Option 3. Large glass balls holding the metal orbs burst, unleashing the torrent down onto the metal trays below. The marble machine thing is kinda cool, but it's also very fragile and easy to be broken by the players, so let's go with option 3. Question 5. How can the punishment be blocked? Option 1. The characters could put something soft onto the trays like blankets, bedrolls or plants, basically diminishing the sound that the metal orbs make when they land. Option 2. They could create a barrier between the trays and the glass balls above. Option 3. One of them could cast the silence spell on the trays. We don't need to choose an option here, but simply make sure that there are some, because if we can think of them, the players are likely to be able to do so as well. Last question. How can the mechanism of the trap be disabled? This one is quite important because this is where the trap gets its complexity from. Answering the other questions have already begun to define our trap, so our number of options become restricted by them. Still, let's try to find a couple of options here. Option 1. The glass balls are shattered by small hammers hanging from the ceiling close to them. When the trap is triggered, they are released and swing into the glass, breaking it. Removing the hammers prevent the trap from working, or padding the glass balls with something soft will prevent the hammers from smashing them. Option 2. Loaded ballistas embedded in the walls point at the glass balls, ready to shoot them. By cutting the strings of the ballistas, the player characters can prevent them from doing this. I want to go with option 2 because it has this clear line of action, going from the ballista shooting, the glass breaking, and then the orbs falling down onto the trays. It makes it easier for the players to figure out what this trap is about and how they are going to deal with it. It might seem a bit too obvious, so you could switch the ballistas for the hammers. Or you could switch the glass balls for clay jars, so the player characters can't really see what's inside them, so they will have to investigate them a little bit more. Okay, now that we have our answers, let's try to build this trap. This is what we got. We have a room with a chest in the middle, possibly containing something the party wants or needs. The floor is covered with broken pottery, crunching loudly underfoot, except for 4 metal trays that are embedded into the floor. High above each tray hangs a ball of glass containing these metal orbs, and pointing at each of the balls is a ballista embedded halfway into the walls. They are about 20 feet up, so it's a little bit of a challenge to reach them. A pair of glowing green crystals sit behind stone eyelets on the back wall, and any noise makes these eyelets creep up. If too much noise is made, they will fly wide open and the ballistas will shoot, breaking the glass and unleashing this torrent of metal balls that will fall down onto the trays and deafen every character in the room. The eyes are there to help the players realize that noise must be avoided. There are several avenues for preventing this trap from working. Perhaps the party covers the trays with their bedrolls or web spell, or they disable the ballistas by cutting the strings or removing the bolts. They may try and manage to keep quiet, but we could put something loud in the chest, so when they open it, all its content is catapulted out, landing noisily on the ground, triggering the trap. We are allowed to be a little bit devious when we're making traps. The players should be aware that something is up in this room, and if they spend some time investigating it, they are likely to figure out how to avoid the trap. In this case, the fact that they need to be quiet adds another level of complexity because they can't communicate in the normal, regular speech way. That's a weird way to put it. They can't talk. There's a kind of theme about sound and silence in this trap, which you could extrapolate into the rest of the dungeon. Maybe you have these foes that only make sound when they attack, that's the only way to find them, or some other things like that. But you could also go the other way around and let the theme of the dungeon inspire the answers to your questions. Hopefully you can see how different the experience between a simple trap and a puzzle trap is. The first one relies on detection and quick thinking, and the other one a more careful and deliberate approach. The puzzle trap in this example isn't super complex, but it's not trying to be a full puzzle either. You could say that the puzzle trap lies somewhere between the pit of the simple trap and the summit of a puzzle's complexity. So far, we have talked about traps in the context of a dungeon, but what if we take them outside in the wider world? Let's look at that. Traps outside dungeons have a very different purpose than those inside them. They're not meant to whittle down the party as they try to progress and manage their resources. Instead, they serve a very specific purpose that can enhance your game in various ways. Let's look at the different goals outside traps can serve. The first goal is an obvious one. This is defense. If the party needs to attack a bandit camp in the middle of the night, or invade an old manor where the enemy is hiding, they might find the first line of defensive traps waiting for them. Maybe a tripwire on approach to the bandit camp causes a wasp's nest to fall down on top of the characters, or hidden pitfalls have been dug around the camp. Perhaps the party's enemies have put fragile bolts of alchemist's fire on top of the doors inside the old manor, so when they try to open the door, this fire will rain down upon them. Or maybe there are bells in the bushes outside, which summons the guard dogs if they're disturbed. Fake floorboards might collapse into rusty spikes, and the doormat itself could be a mimic. These are classic use of traps, but they can also have an offensive purpose. If the enemies are planning to lay an ambush for the player characters, why start the attack by sending in a volley of arrows? Why not let the party walk into a trap, and then the arrows start flying? Maybe they have concealed bottles of alchemist's fire in the road itself, so when the player's wagon drives over it, they explode like landmines. Then, in the confusion of the flames and the breaking wagons, the arrow starts flying. Or the rope bridge that the party needs to cross has been deliberately weakened in a very subtle way, so when they are trying to cross, it breaks. As they are hanging from the remnants, perhaps even split by the collapse itself, the spear starts flying. Or a guild of evil mages could have put down a glyph of reverse gravity, so when the party tries to chase them, suddenly they are sent flying and the fireball starts flying as well. Or perhaps someone has turned on the dragon breath oven to the max, so when a tripwire is triggered, the oven door is swung open, blasting the party with fire. And then cooking utensils starts flying. No matter if they are used defensively or offensively, traps can always spice up an encounter, so it might be worth thinking about them when you're planning one. A third goal of the outdoor trap is to simply spite the player characters. An enemy of the party might set up traps even if they don't need to defend or attack. They could do it simply to spite the players and grow their animosity. Maybe when the party gets to the enemy's temporary hideout, the place is already abandoned, but the foe has rigged it to either burn or explode. It won't kill the characters, but it'll teach them how crafty their enemy is. Or an artifact that the party stole from the enemy turns out to be trapped. As they try to activate it, it starts spinning around, spewing acid in all directions while playing taunting music. Perhaps while they're doing something else, the party's enemies trap their means of transport. So, after setting sail, the characters notice an alarming amount of fire powder barrels in their hold, which they will have to dispose of before the slightest spark can send the whole ship flying. Or the party receives a message from one of their trusted allies to meet them at a nearby lighthouse, but only too late do they realize that they have just entered the most dangerously haunted building in the entire realm. The last two examples show how villains can strike at the party without risking an open confrontation. So if you are afraid that combat might end your story prematurely by some lucky dice rolls, this is a way that you can sort of like hit at the party and let them know that their enemies are active and a threat. Traps are sort of defined by deviousness, so if you have a villain who needs to appear clever, having them lay all kinds of traps for the players is a good way to give that impression. All in all, traps can do a lot for your game, so give them some attention when you prepare your next dungeon or quest or whatever. Especially the traps outside the dungeons, because they are less common and therefore a lot more memorable. But anyway, that is all I have to say about traps for now. They are great. Throw them into your game, throw them at your players, see what happens. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more of this, you can give the video a like, throw a comment into the comment section below. It really helps the algorithm realize that I'm making videos. But yeah, until next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you. Bye!